What if Gojo got killed by Toji and became a cursed spirit? I believe we can all agree that the moment Gojo almost died and came back is a significant turning point in his story. The moment Gojo Shonen became Gojo Sensei. But hold on, what if the story didn't turn out as we witnessed it in the anime? Okay, I know what you're thinking. The possibilities, right? In today's video, we're diving into that very possibility. What if Gojo got killed by Toji, becoming a cursed spirit? How would the story play out? In the original timeline, Satoru Gojo and Suguru Geto were tasked with protecting the star plasma vessel, Riko Amanai, a vessel whose merger with Master Tengen was essential to maintaining the stability of the Jujutsu world. Their mission seemed straightforward: escort Riko safely to her destination while fending off any threats along the way. Unbeknownst to them, the star religious group had hired Toji Fushiguro, an assassin known as the Sorcerer Killer. He was tasked to eliminate Riko and disrupt the merger. Toji was born with no cursed energy, but endowed with extraordinary physical prowess due to a heavenly restriction. He was no ordinary opponent. His lack of cursed energy made him invisible to most techniques, and his expertise in combat made him a lethal force. Toji meticulously planned his attack, striking when Gojo and Geto were least prepared. First, he sent a cursed spirit to test their defenses and draw Gojo's attention. As Gojo exhausted his energy maintaining a protective barrier, Toji used the opportunity to approach undetected. When Toji finally confronted Gojo, the fight was brutal. Gojo, confident in his abilities, underestimated Toji's unpredictability and physical superiority. Using a combination of cursed tools and his unmatched combat skill, Toji overwhelmed Gojo, striking him down with a fatal blow. Gojo, the strongest sorcerer, lay defeated, his life seemingly extinguished. With Gojo out of the way, Toji turned his attention to Riko. Despite Geto's efforts to protect her, Toji's expertise and ruthlessness proved too much. He killed Riko without hesitation, fulfilling his contract and leaving the Star Plasma Vessel's mission in ruins. In the original story, this was a turning point for Satoru, the point where he figured out how to keep his infinity turned on at all times. But what if that was not the case here? The world had faded to black for Satoru Gojo, but it wasn't an end. It was something far worse. Gojo's consciousness stirred within a void, an abyss of swirling hatred, regret, and raw power. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't greeted by the light of the world he once knew, but by an eerie silence. He rose to his feet, his body feeling both familiar and foreign. His white hair still framed his face, and his iconic blindfold remained in place. Yet, he could sense that something had fundamentally changed. Looking down, Gojo saw the truth of his transformation. His lower half no longer resembled that of a human. It was shrouded in an ominous, shadow-like mist, tendrils curling and flowing with a life of their own. His feet were no longer flesh, but jagged spectral shapes that glided over the ground rather than stepped. His hands too bore subtle changes, the veins coursing with a dark energy that radiated a terrifying aura. Gojo's power had not diminished. If anything, it felt amplified. His curse techniques now laced with an unnatural edge, but this power was no longer bound by human limitation. It was cursed energy in its purest, most unrelenting form. He clenched his fists, the weight of his existence sinking in. He wasn't alive anymore, not in the way he had been. Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer, had been reborn as the very thing he was meant to destroy, a cursed spirit. Somewhere nearby, the battle raged on. Geto Suguru, battered and bloodied, faced off against Toji Fushiguro in a desperate attempt to avenge Riko Amanai. The assassin's speed and precision were unmatched, his heavenly restriction giving him an edge even against Geto's powerful arsenal of cursed spirit. Each time Geto summoned a spirit, Toji cut it down with surgical precision, his cursed tools slicing through like a blade through air. Toji would go on to taunt Geto, asking if he was running out of tricks. He knew he couldn't hold out much longer, but retreat wasn't an option. Riko's death was a wound too fresh, too raw, to let Toji walk away unpunished. Then the air shifted. An overwhelming presence descended upon the battle, freezing both combatants in their tracks. Geto turned first, his eyes widening in disbelief. He could feel Satoru, but also something different, something darker. This wasn't the Gojo he knew. Emerging from the shadows, the figure glided forward with an aura so oppressive, it felt suffocating. Gojo's cursed spirit form radiated power, his very presence warping the cursed energy around him. Toji's grin faltered as he turned to face this new threat. It was clear he thought he was seeing a ghost. Gojo raised a hand, and the cursed energy around him surged like a tidal wave. The fight began anew, but this time the outcome was certain. Toji Fushiguro gripped his cursed tools, his eyes locked onto the figure before him. Gojo Satoru stood, his blindfold in place, his aura radiating a dark, suffocating energy. Though his form resembled the sorcerer he had killed, something about him was undeniably different. Toji hissed beneath his breath, something about sorcerers needing to stay dead. Gojo didn't answer. He raised his hand, his cursed energy flaring in response. The sheer pressure of it rippled through the air, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. Toji lunged forward, his cursed tool slicing through the space between them at blinding speed. Gojo sidestepped effortlessly, his movements fluid and precise. It was as though he could anticipate every attack before it came. The fight between them escalated, the battlefield becoming a chaotic clash of cursed energy and raw physical power. Toji's strikes were relentless, his heavenly restriction making him faster and stronger than any normal human. But Gojo matched him, his cursed energy now unbridled and far beyond anything Toji had faced before. With a flick of his wrist, Gojo unleashed a wave of cursed energy that tore through the ground, forcing Toji to leap back. The assassin retaliated with a flurry of attacks, his cursed tool carving through the air in deadly art. But no matter how fast or precise Toji was, Gojo was faster, his movements almost otherworldly. Toji knew he had gotten stronger. What happened to him in such a short amount of time? He didn't seem lost, he just seemed focused. Toji launched a cursed spirit imbued with his own energy, a distraction meant to create an opening. As the spirit lunged at Gojo, Toji darted in from the side, his cursed tool aimed directly at Gojo's heart. In an instant, Gojo's aura darkened, the cursed energy around him condensing into a tangible force. The spirit dissolved before it could even reach him, and Toji's blade was stopped mid-swing, held in place by an invisible barrier. Gojo tilted his head, his voice attempting to say something, but only unintelligible speech came out. As if to show his frustration, he let out a burst of energy, shattering the blade and sending Toji flying backward. The assassin skidded to a halt, his breathing heavy. He wiped the blood from his lip and glared at Gojo. He didn't look unfazed, and Gojo could tell something dark inside him was leading him to end his life, and he would yield to a voice, the feeling. Toji knew this thing was far from human anymore. He knew he had stepped into a special grade curse nest with little preparation. This would be new territory for anyone. The Sage of Six Eyes becoming something dark was something he wasn't sure had ever been heard of in history. He groaned inwardly, and he dashed forward, taunting Gojo. Gojo, without missing a beat, raised his hand, forming the beginnings of a domain expansion. The air grew heavy, and the space around them began to warp. Toji's eyes widened as he recognized the technique. Infinite void. Before he could react, he was already too late. The domain enveloped them, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. When the domain faded, Toji lay on the ground, motionless. His body bore no visible wounds, but the life had been drained from him. Gojo stood over him, his expression unreadable. He glanced down at the assassin, then turned and began to walk away. Geto stumbled onto the battlefield, his body battered from his own fight. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. Toji, the sorcerer killer, was defeated, and standing over him was Gojo? He wondered, his hands shaking. Gojo turned to look at his friend, but something about him was different. It wasn't the confident, almost arrogant look Geto was used to. There was something darker, something that sent a chill down his spine. Without a word, Gojo disappeared, his form dissolving into the shadow. Geto stood frozen, his mind racing. He turned his attention to Toji's lifeless body, then back to the spot where Gojo had vanished. He didn't want to accept this. He saw him die. Determined to find answers, Geto made his way back to the spot where Gojo had fallen. The journey felt longer than it should have. When he arrived, he saw it, Gojo's body, lying in the same spot where Toji had struck him down. Blood pooled beneath him, his lifeless form eerily still. Geto's breath caught in his throat. His mind reeled as he tried to make sense of what he had seen. He knelt beside Gojo's body, his hands trembling as he reached out. The warmth was gone. This was no illusion, no trick of the mind. Geto rose to his feet, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked around as if expecting to see Gojo's figure reappear. But the battlefield was empty. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Geto turned his gaze upward, as if he would see his friend one more time. Whatever had happened to Gojo, he knew one thing for certain. The man he had seen fight Toji was no longer the same. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Geto made his way back to Jujutsu High. The events of the day weighed heavily on him. But one thought consumed his mind. If Gojo Satoru had truly become something else, then the world of Jujutsu was about to change forever. The death of the Sage of Six Eyes. In the wake of Satoru Gojo's death, the hallowed halls of Jujutsu High felt emptier, colder. His absence cast a long shadow over the school, a gaping void that not even the most powerful sorcerers could fill. What was worse is the power vacuum that was left gradually became filled up by chaos. Special grades like Jogo and Hanami became bolder in their actions, speeding up their plans to begin plotting. The plan to revive Sukuna was no longer needed, as no one would stand against them now. Gojo was dead. Students whispered in hushed tones about the day their strongest had fallen. Teachers struggled to remain a semblance of normalcy, but the reality was clear. The Jujutsu world was no longer the same. Among those who felt the loss most acutely was Suguru Geto. He had seen his best friend fall, and worse, had seen something rise in his place. That moment haunted him, replaying endlessly in his mind. The body he found and the figure that fought haunted him without ceasing. But as the days turned to weeks and the weeks into months, Geto's sorrow began to fester. Grief gave way to frustration, then bitterness, then anger. Without Gojo, the Jujutsu world was crumbling under the weight of its enemies. The balance of power had shifted, and Geto found himself questioning everything he once believed in. 2 years later, Geto was no more. In his place stood Kenjaku, the puppet master whose schemes spanned centuries. Kenjaku bore Geto's face, but his heart and soul were twisted into something unrecognizable. Yet, buried deep within him, Geto's memories still stirred, echoes of a past life that refused to be silenced. It was those memories that led Kenjaku to a single realization. Gojo Satoru, his once best friend, had not truly died. He had become something else, something powerful, something primal. And if Kenjaku was to fulfill his ultimate goal, he needed Gojo in his collection. The world without Gojo. The Jujutsu world without Gojo's guiding hand was starkly different. Without his presence, there had been no mentorship for young Megumi Fushiguro, as the original timeline stated. The boy had fallen through the cracks, lost to the shadows of the Zenin clan's brutal politics. Toge Inomaki and Panda, two of Jujutsu High's promising students, remained, but without their iconic teacher, their potential was limited. And then there was Yuji Itadori. Without Gojo's intervention, the vessel of Sukuna never stepped into the world of Jujutsu sorcery. His life remained mundane, untouched by curses or fate. Yuta Akotsu too never emerged as a sorcerer, his latent power undiscovered. Nobara Kugisaki, brimming with talent and ambition, never left her small village, her dreams of grandeur fading into obscurity. Instead, Jujutsu High became a shadow of its former self. The remaining students, Panda, the Maki sisters, and Aoi Todo, amongst others, struggled to hold the line against the growing tide of curses. Principal Gakuganji, though formidable in his own right, lacked the charisma and raw power to inspire the next generation of sorcerers. The Zenin clan, with its fractured loyalties, sent a handful of representatives, but even they couldn't stem the tide. This was the world Gojo had left behind, a world teetering on the brink of collapse. The Shibuya arc in this timeline. The Shibuya incident began as it had in the original timeline, a carefully orchestrated trap set by Kenjaku to sow chaos and tip the scales in favor of curses. The streets of Shibuya were packed with civilians, their lives hanging by a thread as curses roamed freely. The sorcerers on the ground, Panda, Todo, Mai and Maki Zenin, and Principal Gakuganji fought valiantly, but the odds were against them. Todo's booming voice echoed through the chaos as he activated Boogie Woogie, teleporting enemies and allies alike in a desperate bid to outmaneuver the curses. Maki and Mai fought back to back, their movements precise and ruthless. Panda charged into the fray, his massive form barreling through enemy lines. But even their combined efforts weren't enough. The absence of Gojo's presence was felt keenly. There was no unstoppable shield, no assured victory, and the sorcerers were pushed to their limit, their numbers dwindling with each passing hour. And then, something shifted. Deep beneath the city, a cocoon began to stir. For what felt like an eternity, Gojo had been dormant, trapped in a state of limbo. Time had no meaning in that void. To him, it felt like mere moments had passed since his final battle with Toji. Now, something was calling him. His eyes snapped open. His pupils blackened as opposed to his deep blue eye. The world came rushing back. The first thing he noticed was the energy of curses and sorcerers locked in battle. His 6 eyes adjusted, taking in the scene with startling clarity. He could see the threads of cursed energy weaving through the air, the struggle of the sorcerers to keep up. Nanami was engaged in a hated battle against Mahito. He could see the faces of the sorcerers and the malicious glee of the curses as they fed on the carnage. Gojo rose to his feet, his body still shrouded in the strange spectral form he had taken since his death. His lower half shifted like smoke, and remnants of his cursed spirit transformation. He stepped forward, his movements smooth and deliberate. As he emerged into the chaos of Shibuya, the battlefield seemed to pause. Sorcerers and curses alike turned to face him, their reactions ranging from awe to terror. Principal was the first to speak, his voice filled with disbelief as he asked if that was Gojo. Everyone had grown, but Gojo still remained young, his teenage and boyish demeanor coming off as a shock to them. Maki and Mai exchanged uncertain glances, their weapons raised but their movements hesitant. Even Todo, for all his bravado, seemed momentarily stunned. They had only heard of the Sage of Six Eyes. Only the older generation really knew what he looked like. Gojo's gaze swept across the battlefield, taking in the faces of the sorcerers, and they weren't the students he had trained, the ones he had envisioned leading the next generation. They were fighting, risking their lives to protect the innocent. He could see the fear in their eyes, the weight of their struggle. For the first time since his transformation, Gojo felt a spark of his old self. A need to protect, to fight for the world he had once believed in. He wanted to speak, but his words would only sound like his voice was stuck in a blender. As Gojo took in the chaos of Shibuya, the echoes of battle surrounding him, a faint shift in the air caught. Before he could react, a cold hand rested on his shoulder. Time seemed to freeze as Gojo turned his head slightly, and there stood Kenjaku, wearing Suguru face, his expression calm yet brimming with malice. Kenjaku murmured, his voice sickly sweet, as he welcomed him back from the dead. Gojo knew this was not Geto, but before Gojo could move or even speak, a wave of cursed energy surged through him, and the world tilted. Kenjaku's technique activated instantly, a mastery honed over centuries. The process was seamless. Gojo's spectral form flickered, distorted, and then dissolved as Kenjaku's hand glowed with cursed energy. The battlefield fell silent. The sorcerers who had only moments before been fighting for their lives stopped in their tracks, their faces contorting in shock and horror. They had seen Gojo Satoru, their hope and salvation, reappear, only to vanish again in an instant. Kenjaku closed his eye, a triumphant smile spreading across his stolen face. The power of Gojo coursed through him now, a torrent of energy so overwhelming, it almost felt like it was too much, even for him. Finally, he whispered, his voice taking on a signature hint of malice. The cursed energy around Kenjaku swirled and intensified, and with a flick of his wrist, he summoned Gojo's form back into existence. But this wasn't the Gojo Satoru they knew. His body was shrouded in a dark aura, his movements unnervingly fluid, and his lower half still smoked and drifted like a cursed spirit. His eyes, if they could even be called that anymore, glimmered with a strange, almost malevolent light beneath the cloth wrapped around them. The fight that followed was nothing short of a massacre. With Gojo under his control, Kenjaku unleashed devastation upon the sorcerer. The battlefield became a graveyard as cursed techniques rained down with unparalleled precision and force. In this timeline, he had only learned how to use red and blue technique, but what he displayed was beyond anything his evolution could have told him. Todo charged in first, his boogie woogie technique activating with a thunderous clap. But Gojo was faster. Before Todo could even teleport, Gojo flicked his wrist, sending a compressed sphere of cursed energy hurling towards him. Todo barely managed to deflect it, but the force sent him sprawling. Maki and Maizenin fought side by side, their movements showing their training and skill. Maki's cursed tools danced in the air as he lunged at Gojo, strikes precise and unrelenting. But Gojo's movements were effortless. He sidestepped each attack as if they were choreographed, his expression unreadable, and with a single wave of his hand, he unleashed a burst of energy that sent both sisters flying. Panda then roared, his massive form charging towards Gojo with reckless abandon. For a moment, it seemed as if he might land a hit, but Gojo raised his hand, and Panda froze midair, suspended by an invisible force. With a flick of his fingers, Gojo sent Panda crashing into the ground, leaving a crater in its wake. Meanwhile, Principal Gakuganji stood at the edge of the battlefield, his electric guitar vibrating with cursed energy. He strummed a powerful chord, sending waves of energy towards Gojo. The sound echoed across the battlefield, but Gojo remained unmoved. With a casual motion, he reflected the attack back at the principal, who barely manages to dodge. Nanami seemed livid, but he didn't show it. He casually walked towards Gojo, but even someone of his skill had no way of lasting in a drawn-out fight against a malevolent Gojo. Within minutes, the team was defeated. The ground was littered with the wounded, their breathing shallow and labored. Kenjaku watched it all with a satisfied smirk. "You see now?" he said as he called out to the remaining sorcerers. "Even your strongest are nothing compared to what I control. This is the end of your era." But as he turned his attention back to Gojo, ready to solidify his control, he faltered. Kenjaku attempted to assimilate Gojo completely, to turn him into nothing more than a tool in his arsenal. But as his cursed energy surged, he hit an invisible barrier. It felt like infinity, but it wasn't the same. It was darker, more oppressive. A defense that was not merely passive, but actively hostile. Kenjaku stood there, shocked as his composure slipped for the first time. He pushed harder, channeling more energy, but the barrier only grew stronger, its dark aura pulsating with malice. Gojo turned towards him slowly, his head tilting as if curious and to say, "You thought you could control me?" Kenjaku's smile vanished as he realized that Gojo was doing the impossible. Gojo didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hand, and the battlefield erupted in chaos. Energy cackled and surged, ripping through the air as Kenjaku screamed in rage and charged at him. The clash between Gojo and Kenjaku was nothing short of apocalyptic. Each strike from Gojo carried the weight of this newfound power, his movements fluid and unrelenting. Kenjaku countered with centuries of experience, his cursed techniques weaving together in a desperate bid to gain the upper hand. The fight was nothing short of a mirror of the battle between Gojo and Geto from years ago. Each move calculated, yet fueled by raw emotion. The ground beneath them cracked and crumbled. Buildings shattered under the force of their blows, and the very air seemed to tremble with the weight of their cursed energy. Kenjaku launched a barrage of cursed techniques, each one more destructive than the last. But Gojo met them head-on, his dark aura absorbing and reflecting the attacks with ease. He moved like a phantom, appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye, his strikes precise and devastating. Kenjaku screamed in frustration, his composure completely unraveling as he asked, "Why won't you fall?" Gojo didn't answer. He simply continued his assault, his movements growing more relentless with each passing moment. Finally, with a final devastating strike, Gojo sent Kenjaku crashing into the ground, his body broken and battered. As the dust settled, Gojo stood over Kenjaku's fallen form. For a moment, the battlefield was silent. The only sound was the labored breathing of the surviving sorcerers. Gojo turned his head, his gaze falling on Aoi Todo. The sorcerer was struggling to his feet, his body battered. For a brief moment, Gojo's expression softened, as if to say, "It's up to you now." He pointed towards Kenjaku, then disappeared into the shadows. What do you think about the video? Do you think we captured this what-if scenario? Let us know in the comments. How do you think the scenario would have gone? Also, if you love this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our channel for more videos like these. Until next time!